Good evening, all the joinees. Thank you for joining in. Hi, this is Ashi. I welcome you all for today's webinar on behalf of NGEN Research. Meanwhile, others join in. Let us have a look at today's topic. So today we'll be covering the topic of how you can do mutual fund analysis on the platform, wherein we'll be looking upon performance comparison with peers and benchmark return. Then we'll be looking at asset allocation, focusing on the holdings, moving forward with rolling returns and rolling return distribution. Then we'll be covering the topic of drawdown analysis and scenario analysis. And then we'll be looking at certain reporting options that are available on the platform. And at the end, the forum will be then open for a Q&A session. Now, this is the landing page of the NGEN Markets. First, we'll be seeing what are the multiple ways in which you can load a fund for a single fund analysis. The very first method is using this Funds tab. So as soon as you move towards the Funds tab, this is the screener that we have provided. Now here, you can filter the funds not only based upon the AMC, you can also filter it based upon the categories as well. So as soon as you click on the option filter categories, you would be able to see that there are 4 baskets, which basically represents SEBI asset classes, and within which are the multiple categories that are listed. Now there is no limitation. You can select as many category as you wish. So for today's webinar, I'll be selecting mid cap fund as a category. Now to load these funds onto the screener, all you have to do is click on this checkbox. Now, as soon as you do so, all of the 29 results that you see right here will get loaded on the screener. So here we can currently see that there are total 29 results. Now to load a fund for a single fund analysis, you just have to click on the name of the fund. Now, for example, I want to have a detailed fund analysis of Motilal Oswal Midcap Fund. What I will do is, I will simply click on its name. As soon as I do so, it will load the single fund analysis of Motilal Oswal Midcap Fund in a separate tab. Now, this is the first method wherein we used the fund section. The second method would be using this compare section. Now, as soon as you move towards the compare tab, here basically predominantly the compare section is used for a fund on fund analysis. Now here, there's a tab called Add Groups. Now within this Add Group, you can also add a SEBI category. So continuing with the example of mid-cap funds, I will just select mid-cap right here. And as soon as you do so, all of the 29 results will get loaded in the compare section. Now, along with other information as well, which would be CAGR, standard deviation, Sharpe ratio, month on month, year on year return as well. Now, again, the procedure remains the same. Let us say you want to analyze HDFC Mid-Cap Opportunities Fund. So in that case, what you will do is you will again click on the name of the funds, and as soon as you do so, it will get loaded in a separate tab. So this was the second method of loading a fund for a single fund analysis. Now let us take a look at what is the third method of doing so. So for that, we'll head back to the platform again. And as soon as you move towards the platform, you would be able to see a search bar on the top, which states search fund. Now right here, I will search for, continuing with the example of HDFC Midcap Opportunities Fund. So I will just type HDFC Midcap Opportunity. And all you have to do is then click on the name of the fund. Now, as this gets loaded, on the left-hand side, you can see there are certain basic details that are mentioned related to that particular fund. First is ISI and AMFI code. Second is asset class. Third is category and several other details as well. Now here you can also see there is an option to change the start date and end date. Now let us say that I want to analyze this particular fund for the period of past 5 years. In that case, I will click on this option change, and here you have option to custom your own start date, or what you can do is you can select from the option that has already been provided. So I will just hit on 5 years ago. And as soon as you do so, we can see that the analysis have now loaded, wherein this is being analyzed for the period of past 5 years, which is 18th Feb 2020 till 20th Feb 2025. Now on the left hand side, you can also see that there is a benchmark section right here. And currently this particular fund is being compared with Nifty Midcap 150. Now this is the benchmark that is being selected. Now let us say you want to compare the performance of the fund with its category average. Now in that case, what you will do is you will click on this NGEN sub tab within this benchmark section. And right here you can see historical SEBI category averages. Now here you will search for the relevant category average. As we are analyzing a mid-cap fund, so the relevant one would be mid-cap right here. So I'll just select. And as soon as I do so, all of the analysis that you see, mainly the graphical representation and several other parameters. So all of these funds analysis is being now done in comparison to the category average, that is mid-cap fund. Now what we'll do is we'll move back to the original benchmark, that is Nifty Midcap 150, and start with the analysis. So for that, I'll hit Add NSE as a tab, and then I'll select Nifty Midcap. Now, as this gets done, there's a graphical representation that you would be able to see on the left-hand side, wherein the blue line represents our fund and the black line represents the index. Now, this index is Nifty Midcap 150. On the right-hand side, you can see the performance statistics, which is month to date, year to date, as well as 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year annualized return that is being generated by the fund as well as the benchmark. Now let us take a look at several parameters that are mentioned right here. First is this cumulative return. Cumulative return is basically absolute or point-to-point return that is being generated by a fund as well as the benchmark. Here we can see that the cumulative return of our fund is to an extent of 205%. Whereas when it comes to benchmark, it is to an extent of 186. We can clearly see that the fund is outperforming the benchmark when we took cumulative return as a parameter. Now the next parameter that we'll be looking upon would be this CAGR. CAGR talks about the average rate of return that a fund has generated on an annual basis. And here we can clearly see that our fund has generated a cumulative return of about 24%, which is slightly more in comparison to the benchmark, which is to an extent of 23%. So again, we can clearly see that our fund has outperformed in comparison to its benchmark when we took CAGR as a parameter. Now, the next parameter that we'll be looking upon would be this annual volatility. Now here, annual volatility is basically the standard deviation signifying the risk. So here we can clearly see that the benchmark is having an annual volatility of about 19%, whereas fund is generating an annual volatility of about 18%. So we can clearly see that with a lesser volatility, this particular fund was able to generate a higher cumulative return. And that is something that is indicated in Sharpe ratio as well. So Sharpe ratio is risk-adjusted return, indicating how well the fund is performing in comparison to the risk that it is taking. So higher the Sharpe ratio, the better it is. And we can clearly see that the Sharpe ratio generated by our fund is much better in comparison to that of the benchmark, having a Sharpe ratio of only about 0.82%. Now the next parameter that we'll be looking upon would be this cumulative excess on benchmark. So cumulative excess on benchmark is nothing but the alpha. So here we can clearly see that the alpha generated by our fund is to an extent of 19%. Now, how did we derive to this 19%? This is nothing but simply subtracting the value that is of the cumulative return of the fund with that of the benchmark. Once you subtract this, the difference will come up to 19.25%, which is basically the alpha that is being generated by the fund. Now, other two parameters that we'll be looking upon are these two important ratios, which is up capture ratio and down capture ratio. Up capture ratio talks about how well the fund is performing in terms of generating return when it comes to performing in the bull run in comparison to the benchmark. Now here we can see that the up capture ratio generated by our fund is to an extent of 93.28. Now if we consider that the benchmark was having an up capture of 100, it simply means that when the benchmark was up by 10%, our particular fund was up by 9.3%. Now to get a further bifurcation, that is month on month drill down, you can anytime click on this I button. Now, as soon as you do so, you can see what was the return that was being generated by the fund as well as the benchmark. Now, please note, only those months will be taken under consideration wherein the benchmark was generating positive return, irrespective of the fund generating either positive or negative return. On top, what you can see is the CAGR of the fund in comparison to that of the benchmark. Once you divide this, it will come up to 93.28, which is something reflected right here in the up capture ratio. Exactly opposite would be the down capture ratio, indicating how the fund was performing when the market was in bear run. Now here we can clearly see that the down capture ratio of our fund is to an extent of 86.42. Now, what does this indicate? Now, again, considering that the benchmark was having a down capture of 100, it simply means that when the benchmark was down by 10%, our particular fund was down by 8.6%. And again, to get a month on month bifurcation, you can anytime click on this particular I button. Now, please note here only those months will be taken under consideration wherein the benchmark was generating negative return, irrespective of our fund generating either negative or positive return. On top, you can find what is the overall return that was generated by the fund as well as the benchmark. And once you divide this, it will come up to 86.42. Now, just to conclude, higher the up capture ratio, the better it is, and lower the down capture ratio, the better it is. Now, the next thing that we would be looking upon would be this monthly statistics. Now, in monthly statistics, basis the start date and end date that we have picked up, which is basically 18th Feb 2020 till 20th Feb 2025, what does this indicate is there are total 61 months under consideration. Out of the 61 months, 44 were such months wherein the fund was up or when it was generating positive return. And there were 17 such months wherein the fund was generating negative return. When we take a look at the percentage wise, what does this indicate is that the fund was up by 72% of time and down by 27% of time. Now, while it was up, that is in this 44 months, the best return that it has generated was to an extent of 13%, whereas the worst return that it has generated was to an extent of 0.01%. And while it was down, wherein it was generating negative return, the minimum that it went down by was negative 0.17%. Whereas the maximum negative return that this particular fund has generated is to an extent of negative 30.71%. Now, this can also be plotted on chart wherein you can see exactly wherein was the best and the worst return registered. So if we hover right here, we can see it was in the month of March, year 2020, wherein the worst return of about 30.71% negative was being registered by this particular fund. And in the month of November 2020 was the best performance that was registered by this particular fund, which was to an extent of 13.07%, which is something that we can see right here as well. So this was for performance analysis. Now, next parameter that we'll be looking upon would be this asset allocation. Now, asset allocation is the tab which is right beside the fund's performance. As soon as you come here, you can see that what are the current holdings of a particular mutual funds. And here we can clearly see that there are 82 holdings for this particular fund. And this data is as of 31st Jan 2025. Now our update cycle, it runs from 8th to 13th of every month. So by 13th, all of the holding analysis will be updated onto the platform. And this holding is anytime downloadable in the Excel format as well. Now, the next thing that we would be looking upon would be this position changes by month. Now, as soon as you come here you can see what is the largest increase, largest decrease, and the new position added, as well as the position that were removed from the fund's portfolio versus the previous month. That is for the period of past 12 months. Now, if we look at this data, which is of 31st Jan 2025 versus the previous month, we can see that the largest increase was towards IndusInd Bank, which was to an extent of 0.71%. Whereas there was certain new position added, wherein one particular stock, which was Vishal Mega Mart, which was to an extent of 0.66%. And there were also certain positions that were being removed from the fund's portfolio, one being Tata Chemicals, which was to an extent of 0.52%. So this was for position changes by month. Now the next thing that we would be looking upon would be position over time. Now, as soon as you come here, you can see how did the holding percentage changed for a particular stock over a period of time, that is for the period of past 12 months again. Now, red color shows any kind of decrease in the holdings as compared to the past month, and green would indicate any kind of increase in the holding again in comparison to the previous month. You can also sort this particular data in alphabetical order as well by clicking on the word security. Now here we can see that Aarti Industries is one of the stock that is being held by this particular mutual fund. We can see as of 31st December 2024, the holding was to an extent of 0.42%, which then increased to an extent of 0.48%. Now, if you want to know, was this because there was change in the price or due to increase in the number of shares, that can also be done onto the platform. Now, all you have to do is change this from percentage to shares in lakhs. Now, once this gets done, we can anytime locate Aarti Industries right here, and we can see that there was absolutely no change in the number of shares that was being held by this particular portfolio. It is constant. So we can conclude that the increase that we were able to see in terms of percentage was because there was increase in the price of this particular stock. So this is by securities. You can also get the data of position over time sector wise as well. For that, you just have to click on buy sector. And as soon as you do so, again for the period of past 12 months, you would be able to see how the holdings have changed. Now, the next thing that we would be looking upon in the asset allocation is this equity sector. Now, here you can see the sector-wise exposure as well. So here we can clearly see that for this particular fund, the highest allocation is towards bank as a sector, which is to an extent of 12.34%. Now, exactly what stocks in bank? To know that, all you have to do is click on this blue bar right here. As soon as you do so, it will give you the list of the stocks in the bank, and all the individual holdings is something that you can find right here at the extreme right hand side. Once this is all added up, it will come up to 12.34%, which is something reflected right here. Similarly, let us check for IT software. You just have to again click on this particular black bar, and it will give you the stocks in IT software. And again, you would be able to see what are the individual percentage wise holding. And again, when you add this all up, it will come up to 9.74%, which is something that is mentioned right here. Now, the next thing that we would be looking upon would be this peers tab. Now, this particular tab is used to understand how the fund is performing in comparison to its peers as well as the average. Now, the data that you see here would be static. That is, since the inception of all of these funds. Now, to have a fair analysis, it is very important that you load this particular category in the compare tab. So for that, what we'll do is we'll move towards the compare section. And in the compare section, we have already loaded the list of mid-cap funds. Now, let us say you want to analyze all of these funds for the period of past 5 years, because the data currently is since the inception. So what you would do is, in this return column right here, you can see there is a settings wheel icon. You would be required to click on the settings wheel icon and pick up the date accordingly. So as we want to analyze this for the period of past 5 years, we'll just click on this drop down, select 2020, hit on 3rd Feb, and then hit on go. As soon as you do so, there will be a prompt stating that a custom start date is being selected. Now here we can see there is HDFC mid-cap opportunities. Now for the period of past 5 years, we can see that the CAGR is to an extent of 25%, whereas the Sharpe ratio of this particular fund is to an extent of 0.96%. So compare section is basically used in order to have a fair fund on fund level analysis. So this was for the peers tab. Again, as mentioned that the data here would remain static. So it is very important that you always load the funds in the compare section to have a fair analysis. Now the next thing that we would be looking upon would be this rolling tab. Now rolling talks about the consistency of the fund. Now here you can check for 3 rolling windows simultaneously. 260 stands for 1 year rolling period, which is basically 1 year working period. So in 1 year, there are 260 working days. 520 stands for 2 years working period, and 780 stands for 3 years rolling window. Let us say, for example, you want to check for 4 years. You can anytime multiply 260 into 4 and input the number of days in any of these boxes. As soon as you do so, you would be required to then click on run. You can get the view in absolute as well as on annualized basis as well. So for 260 days, here we can see that the average rolling return generated was to an extent of 31%, whereas the volatility of this particular fund, which is rolling volatility, is to an extent of 16%. The highest return that this particular fund has generated is to an extent of 71%, and whereas the lowest return that is generated is to an extent of 0.56%. Now, if you want to plot this particular highest return that the fund has generated, that can be done on this particular chart. For that, you just have to turn off the other rolling windows. So I will just click on 520 rolling and 780 rolling. And all you have to do is click and drag. As soon as you do so, this is the point wherein the highest rolling return is something that has been mentioned. So it is 22nd March 2021. So what does this indicate? It indicates that if an investor would have invested exactly 260 days prior to this particular date, he would have been the luckiest because then he would have received an opportunity to enjoy the highest return, which is to an extent of 71.29%. Also, we have is this return ranges right here. So return ranges is basically to check the probability of a fund generating return between a particular range. Now let us say there is a client that comes up to you and say that there is a target return range that they have, which is to an extent of 10 to 20%. So you just enter the range right here to check the probability of this particular fund generating return between 10 to 20%. So you enter 10 to 20% right here, and then you hit outside the box. As soon as you do so, here you can clearly see that basis the back tested data, there is 18% probability that this particular fund can generate a return between 10 to 20%. So this is for 260 days rolling window. You can change the rolling window accordingly. Also, one more example, if we take, for example, basic FD rate. So you just enter 0 to 7% right here. And as soon as you do so, we just click outside the box and we can see about 3% is the probability that this particular fund can generate a return which is equivalent to a basic FD rate. So there are multiple ranges that you can enter right here. As soon as you click outside the box, you would be able to see what is the probability of a fund generating return between a specific range, and the range that you input right here along with the probability will come up in a bar chart representation as well. So this was for rolling returns. Next, we'll be looking upon would be this drawdown analysis. Now, drawdown talks about the strength of the fund to recover from the losses. As soon as you come towards drawdown, the first thing that you would be able to see is a graphical representation. This gray section talks about the loss period, whereas the white area talks about the recovery phase. As soon as you scroll down, you would be able to see the details of the top 10 drawdowns. Now here, there was a worst loss that this particular fund has faced, which was to an extent of 36%. This was between 20th Feb 2020 till 23rd March 2020, wherein the NAV of this particular fund, it fell from 57 to 36, and it took 168 days to recover. When did it finally recover? It finally recovered on 12th of November 2020. Also, there are certain ongoing corrections which is also highlighted onto the platform as well. Now, the next thing that we would be looking upon would be this scenario analysis. Now, scenario analysis is basically wherein you can check how the fund was performing versus the benchmark in a particular past event. So recently we have seen that US tariff was something that is currently in the news, and there's a lot of volatility that is going on in the market. Dollar is strong and FIIs are taking out their money as well. So let us try to understand how this particular fund was performing versus the benchmark in this particular scenario. So in that case, of course, there are certain inbuilt scenario onto the platform which is already available, but you can custom your own scenario as well. So in the custom scenarios tab, you just click on add custom scenario as an option. You would then be required to give it a name. So I will give it a name as US tariff. Once this gets done, we'll pick up the start date accordingly. So I'll choose 1st Jan 2025, and we'll do 1 month analysis. So 31st Jan 2025. And then you just hit on save custom scenario. As soon as you do so, you would be able to locate it right here again in the custom scenarios tab itself. So this is right here. So as soon as you click on it, you would be able to see it accordingly. So now here, this blue line basically represents our fund and black line represents our benchmark. And here we can clearly see that both benchmark as well as the fund were down. Benchmark was down by 6.57%, whereas our fund was down by 6.64%. The volatility that our particular fund was facing was to an extent of 21%, whereas the benchmark was facing a volatility of about 27%. Now let us check how the fund was performing versus an American index in the same scenario. So for that, we'll change the benchmark to S&P 500, representing 500 largest companies that are listed on the stock exchange in the US. For that, we'll use this benchmark section again. And in this benchmark section, you can find this world as a subtab. So you click on world and you search for the relevant benchmark. So I will pick up S&P 500. And as this gets changed, we'll move back to the scenarios tab and select US tariff as an option. And here we can clearly see that our particular fund, of course, generating a negative return of 6.64%, whereas the American benchmark, which is S&P 500, is still positive, which is to an extent of 2.7%. So American market were in positive, whereas our fund here in this particular scenario was generating a negative return. Now, all of these data that you see right here can also be captured in few reporting options that are available onto the platform. We have 1-pager PDF report, 2-pager PDF report, and 3-pager PDF report as well. To generate a report, you would require to just click on PDF as an option, and then you select Create PDF. As soon as this gets done, a single fund analysis gets loaded basis the PDF report that has been generated. So on top left, it will be co-branded. So your company name and logo is something that you would be able to find right here. So again, this is for HDFC Mid Cap Opportunities Fund. You would be able to see the information that is available onto the platform, asset allocation, holding wise information, their split in large, mid, small, and other sector wise exposure, performance analysis, parameters wise information, monthly statistics, yearly statistics, performance, and again, drawdown and rolling return analysis as well. And last page being the disclaimer. Also, you can generate a PowerPoint report for the same. You would require to just click on PPT as an option. And PPTs are anytime customizable onto the platform. So this can be customized as per the requirement of the client. So this is how the PPT report will look like. And again, on top left, on each of the slide, you would be able to see your company name and So all of the information related to holdings, asset allocation, they're split in large, mid, small, and others, sector-wise exposure, holding-wise information, parameter-wise information, rollings, and drawdown. Now, let us say you want to add the scenario that we were just looking upon. You can anytime generate a screenshot for the same. So there's a screenshot button that is right beside beta as an option. You just click on it. And as soon as this gets saved onto your system, you would then be required to move back to the PPT option. You can insert a master slide that is being provided. And then as the screenshot gets saved onto your device, you can anytime insert it right here. So this is how you can customize the report basis the requirement of the client. So that was it for today's topic related webinar. The forum is now open for a Q&A session.
Hi, ma'am. I wanted to ask something.
Yes, please go
Uh,
ahead.
can you go on the main tab?
Yes.
Yeah. So, assuming these are the scheme selections, is
Hmm.
there a way that we can probably add a column for stocks in each scheme on the main page?
Number of holdings that each
Number
fund
of stocks.
has.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, so we do have a column. You need to use the scroller and move towards the right. These blue color coded columns
Okay, okay.
will show
Holding.
you the holding columns. So this was
Okay,
also recently
and
added.
is there a provision that we can add top three holdings or top three sectors in a scheme on this page itself?
Top three sectors for each of these funds is what you're saying.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. Currently, we do not have that. You can anytime view that on a single fund. We could maybe take that down as a feedback if that could be incorporated in the compare
Yeah,
section.
yeah. Just wanted to give this feedback.
Sure.
Okay.
Can you just go to the main sheet that you have just opened? If you don't select the custom start date, it will show the since inception data, right?
Correct. That is correct.
So every time when we use this sheet,
Hmm.
we just need to change the date to the latest date or whatever date we want to choose.
Yes. So by default, when you bring the funds to the compare section, it
Hmm.
will be since the inception of each of those funds. Now, an identifier can also be there for you to quickly identify that it is since inception. Yeah, we'll just add like few funds right here. Right. So once you add these funds, you see the cumulative column ends up being blank. So that can also be an indicator stating that the start date has not been picked up and the data that you're viewing is since inception. As soon as you put in a start date, the cumulative data would come up and all the data, CAGR, standard deviation, sharp for that matter, will be for the respective time period that you have set it.
So, for example, the same data, if I want to select, let's say, 10 scheme, we can make the list that is there.
Hmm,
But
hmm,
I just want to customize the column as well. Let's say, if when I'm saving this sheet, I don't want to
hmm,
take 1 day, 3 day, 5 day return, whatever it is
hmm.
return. I just
Sure.
want to take 1 month to 5 year return. So how can we customize and save it in a such a way that
Yes.
again when I pop up this sheet, the data won't come up?
Okay, so you want respective columns to come up again once you load that sheet, correct?
Yeah, the list that we have said,
Yes.
you have
Sure.
286 sheet here. So
Correct. So what you could do if you just want to manage these columns, so there is an abacus kind of a structure just below the main list. You can remove all the columns and just select those columns that you want to be seen when you load your sheet. Yeah. So let's say we select a few columns for now. Yeah. Once this is done, once you select these columns, you save this list. You give your name, you save this list. Yeah. You have to just save this list. Yeah. Ashi, could you just click on save icon? Yeah. Yeah. And the next time that you come on, you just click on my list and select your list. The column view would also be saved. So the columns that you had selected now comes up once you have loaded the list.
और इसमें custom date अभी नहीं set है, right? We need to add the date now because वो अभी तो column चला गया है cumulative वाला.
No, because we had initially set that date will still be there.
Okay.
Yep.
So I can change the date. Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
I have a question, ma'am.
Yes,
Hello.
go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Can you please explain the information ratio again?
Sure. So, yes, so information ratio and tracking error, these are the ratios that become useful or beneficial when you're looking at an ETF or maybe let's say an index fund. So, what do these ratios explain is how are these funds catching up with that of the benchmark. Now, if you're talking about ETFs or let's say an index fund, their basic motive or their basic objective would be to piggy bank the performance of the benchmark. Now, for active funds, it will be total opposite. They will try to outperform the benchmark per se. Now, every time you look upon tracking error, it would be higher for an actively managed fund, while when you compare it to a passively managed fund, the tracking error would be lower. And in a similar way, information ratio, which again is similar to that of a tracking error when you're looking at the performance of a respective fund, this shows you the performance or the skill of the fund manager. So we rather say if information ratio is positive, the fund is outperforming the benchmark. And if the information ratio is negative, the fund is underperforming the benchmark. And how do we arrive at this information ratio? It is a simple division of annual excess, simple annual excess when divided by tracking error, we arrive at this information ratio.
Okay, got it. Got it. So basically, in actively managed fund, the information ratio must be on the positive end.
Correct, because the objective of those actively managed funds should be to outperform the benchmark.
Okay, okay. Okay, ma'am. Got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, this is Rajat, and I have a query.
Yes, go ahead.
So, in case of debt funds, can you help how to calculate returns which is annualized for less than 1 year? Because your data will show absolute return for less than 1 year and more than 1 year CAGR. But
Correct.
for some time, like for liquid plus and arbitrage, we also need a data for less than 1 year on an annualized basis. Can you help?
Sure. So, any category that you're looking upon?
Please take arbitrage.
Sure. Yeah, so we can go to the fund section. Yeah, we could select arbitrage funds. Let's say we select 3 or 4 funds and take it to the compare section. Right. So for what time period, if I may know, you're just saying it to view maybe for the past 1 year, latest 1 year is what you're saying?
So 1 year is the absolute and CAGR will be the same. I'm
Correct.
asking for a 1 day, the less than 1 year category, no? So
Okay.
1 day, five. So here, if you see
Huh.
that in 3 months it is 1.59, 1.68, but when
Correct.
we annualize it, then the real picture will be able to come.
Okay, so you wish to annualize these time period which is less than a year and view the CAGR data for these 3 months or less than a year period. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So what you could do is you can go to the point to point section. So this is a section wherein you can input in your time period, your scenario. So there are 5 buckets in total. So what you could do is, let's say we create the latest 3 months scenario right here. Let's say we take it from November 1st till maybe 20th Feb 2025. Yeah. Yes. So let's say we just take in the start date as December. Yeah, December. So you see, this is a 3-year time period that we have set in. You can also view its CAGR. There is a toggle option for CAGR as well as absolute. So you could use both.
So there is no way we can select uh, annualized return automatically the way it was coming.
Yeah, hi, Arnab. So here, this particular CAGR option, there's a question mark there also. There also we actually clearly say that it shows annualized even when less than 1 year, right? The only issue with what you're asking in a table form where the heading is 3 months, 6 months, um, obviously there are some kind of SEBI rules which we have to follow in terms of reporting performance. So they are very strict that if we show 6 month return, we cannot show annualized. So unless we have some kind of clear toggle or something like that, the only way to do it is to kind of select a set of dates. So that's why what Ansu just showed you, that's the best way to kind of look at a period where you can see annualized. But generally speaking, in that kind of main table form, it will be hard for us to show annualized for less than 1 year period, because and we'll try to see if there's any way for us to maybe give a clear toggle. But generally speaking, we have to always we can't annualize if it's less than 1 year.
Yeah, that rule is for equity funds. For debt funds, there is a way. If you look at a liquid fund,
Yeah.
if you just select a category as a liquid fund, you'll
Yeah.
not be able to find any difference between any competition,
Hmm.
right? And you select a top 10 all schemes, and you just put or 7 8 schemes, and when you see that, everyone would be on a same number. So when comparing this kind of a data, annualize help basically for non-equity schemes.
Understand. I mean, the only thing we can do here is maybe we'll look at some kind of option where on the top there is a checkbox which is usually unchecked.
Yeah.
And that will say annualize even less than 1 year. So at least the user is clear what is going on, right? So
Yes.
yeah, fine. So we can, Ansu, let's write this down. We can put a checkbox towards the right near the Excel icon where it will annualize those 4 5 columns also.
And one more, I mean, so two more queries. Can you help us in explaining the relative returns in this case? Because when I try to do that, I'm not able to use it effectively. So if you can help on the relative returns, how to use the same in the same table.
Yes. So
Yeah.
once you have loaded your list of funds, you need to scroll towards the right and you would locate these pink color coded columns, which will by default be empty. You need to activate them by clicking on the checkbox of relative returns. Once you do that, the data set comes up, and by default, the benchmark that gets selected would be Nifty 50. You could change in your benchmark and select an appropriate benchmark as per your requirement. Followed by that, the dates as well need to be input. So we need to make sure that the date that we take in the returns column is similar to that we take in the relative returns column, just so that we can have a fair apples to apples comparison. Now, here the parameters that you could view are firstly cumulative excess and annual excess. Cumulative excess, as the name suggests, excess that is generated by a fund over the benchmark. And once we annualize this cumulative excess, the data comes up for annual excess. So, cumulative excess divided by the number of years that is under consideration gives you the figure for annual excess. Followed by that is beta, which lets you see how riskier a fund is when you compare it to that of a benchmark. So, beta of a benchmark with itself will always be 1, and beta higher than 1, let's just say that the fund is more riskier than that of the benchmark. Followed by tracking error and information ratio, as I explained initially. These are something that becomes beneficial when maybe you're looking upon an index fund or an ETF. which lets us see how efficiently the fund is tracking the performance of the benchmark. Because the objective of these ETFs or index fund would be indeed to piggyback the performance of the benchmark, whereas for an actively managed fund, the tracking error should be higher, which suggests that it has been outperforming the benchmark. Followed by that is correlation, which lets you see how correlated a fund is when you compare it to that of the benchmark. And the last two columns are capture ratios, up capture and down capture. Up capture tells us that when the benchmark is moving up, how quickly the fund is able to catch up with the benchmark. And down capture lets us see that when the fund benchmark is going down, how resilient was your fund in comparison to that of the benchmark.
Yeah, I followed that. Actually, I was making a mistake in selecting the dates. So
Okay.
that's why the no, it was not coming proper.
Okay, sure, sure.
Okay.
So we've also given an I button just for an information, so that you make
Yeah.
sure that the date you select in the returns column matches with the date that you select in the relative returns column.
So can I ask you one more question, which is not on the performance side?
Yes.
So while I upload the portfolio, actually I'm getting an error,
Hmm.
which is like start date and end date uh, is not
Okay,
the
they're
matching.
not overlapping,
Uh,
correct. So that
so how to
typically, yes,
yeah.
that typically happens because there might be some stock in that portfolio which is either not trading on BSE or has been delisted. So maybe post this session, we could connect with you for the same over a Zoom call or a Teams call, and we could resolve the same with you.
Also, just to add, when you get that non-overlapping error, it means that there are two items in your portfolio, fund, stock, whatever, where one of them the data is ending before the data of the second one begins. So in that case, what happens is we can't run a back test because one fund, let's say the data stops 1 year ago and the second fund starts 6 months ago. So then we can't run a back test because all the items in your portfolio must be trading together at some point of time. So that's the reason you get it. So as Ansu said, most likely the reason is you've got something in there where the data isn't up to date until maybe the stock doesn't trade anymore. Maybe it's got delisted from one exchange to the other. So usually the issue is with stocks.
Yeah, you are right. Because there's a one stock which has got delisted, and
That's
I have
right.
uploaded the data from the eCash.
Yeah.
So I am not able to even delete that name.
So
So I'm
you
stuck.
can once you upload the stock portfolio from your eCash and then you load it in here, you can save it. Once you save it in the portfolio section, you can click the edit button like you can see on the screen, and you can simply remove that stock. If you want, for the purpose of the backtest, you want to replace it with a different similar stock, you can do that. But you can edit the portfolio here and then run it, and it will run fine.
Great. I think this will solve my.
It will. Lots of our users have to do this because they have certain stocks that were bought many years ago. It doesn't, it's not there. So you have to be careful to make sure the weights add up to 100, but that will definitely work.
Thank you. That's all from my side.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, ma'am. Actually, I have a request. Like in the
Hmm.
next few session, can you guys like do a session on a full fund selection process for, let's say, if we want to select top 5 funds in the large cap categories. So
Hmm.
accordingly, what are the parameters we have to go through to check each of those fund? And at the end of the webinar, we will be ending with top 5 fund in that particular category. Can we do that?
Uh, Yes, maybe we can take it up in the following week that comes up, or the next week that comes up. We have anyways done many webinars on the same, selecting funds, best funds from the category. You can anytime visit our YouTube page for the same. We could maybe do that as well as you requested in the next week or the next to next week. Anyways, we have a playlist. You can access these webinar playlist. We have done, you can see, screening and selection of mutual fund schemes, risk analysis for mutual funds. So in these topics, we select specific category. In that specific category, we talk about various parameters that could be used for shortlisting and screening of funds.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
In the same thing, can we also understand how to analyze the newer funds? Because engine score में 3-4 साल अगर पुराना फंड है ना, तो engine score से वो फंड आइडेंटिफाई करना थोड़ा टफ हो जाता है, क्योंकि उसका रिस्क स्कोर भी उतना अच्छे से नहीं आता है. तो द पॉइंट दैट द लास्ट पर्सन सेड, उसमें हम ये भी ऐड कर सकते हैं जहाँ पे हम कुछ पैरामीटर्स ऐसा डिस्कस करें जहाँ पे हम न्यूअर फंड्स को एनालाइज कर पाए.
That's a great idea. We'll just give us some times. We'll do some brainstorming and try to figure out at least some methods that can be used for new funds. And once we do, we'll do a webinar.
Because you are the expert, we have all the data in place. Sometimes we want to show a newer funds where we can say कि इस फंड का, फंड मैनेजर्स का कुछ भी, because ये सारा डेटा हमारे पास है. अगर हमें 1-2 पैरामीटर्स मिल जाएगा, सो सेम में हम जो कैटेगरी के टॉप 5 फंड्स चूज करेंगे, उसमें हम ये भी देख सकते हैं कि हाँ, जो न्यूअर फंड्स हैं, AUM वाइज वो कम है, वो एक एडवांटेज भी हो सकता है.
Yes,
So that way, something where you can guide us also.
absolutely. Just give us some time. We'll think of some ideas and then we'll put together a webinar for that.
And also, I've requested one thing, that all the thing that you guys mentioned about the correlation and everything, I just needed a short one-liner. Last time I have discussed,
Yeah,
like a disclaimer.
Okay, yeah, to add in the disclaimer.
Yeah,
yes, I remember
disclaimer
this.
about, because when we send it to the client, if we also like sometimes tend to forget that what does a tracking error means, for example. So just a one-liner on tracking error.
Yeah. Anju, let's make sure that this is on the list. We should
Yes,
just
sir.
kind of standard kind of one pager at the end of everything.
And one more thing I wanted to add, if you can, when we take the compare section, I don't know exactly, but when we take the data in Excel, sometime it will not show the range period. When you convert the data into PowerPoint, it will show you the start and end date. जो यहाँ पे system पे दिख रहा है ना, अभी जैसे ये invested date यहाँ पे 1st Jan 2020 से हम 20 Feb तक का कर रहे हैं. बट ये डेटा जब कंपेयर सेक्शन से हम एक्सेल में लेते हैं, तो उसमें स्टार्ट डेट नहीं आता या पीरियड नहीं आता कि हमने ये डेटा किस दिन लिया है या किस पीरियड का लिया है.
We'll take a look at what you do, because generally speaking वो Excel जो हम download compare section में दिए हैं, that is basically for a quick download of the data if you want to do something on Excel on your side, rather than for kind of sharing with clients. We have a project in the backend where we are trying to create some really nicely formatted Excel downloads. Not because this is what you can see is more like a CSV, just pure data.
Right.
So we are trying to build something which will be a nice looking Excel that you can actually download and send to a client also if they want Excel. Just give us some time. We'll try to build something.
Yeah, sure.
Any other questions? Please let us know. Okay, if there's nothing else, so we can close for the day. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining in. You can anytime view the past webinar recording on the YouTube channel. We have a dedicated webinar playlist that is being created. And today's webinar will be uploaded by next week. Thank you and have a great weekend.